Here we go. Welcome to the Live Your Dreams podcast with Success Leaves Clues and someone has your answer. Joined as always with my lovely co-host, Mrs. Tia Mckisset.
Hello.
All right. So first and foremost, today we're going to be talking about compromise. All right. So I know compromise is really important, especially when you're in a relationship. One of the things, Tia, when you talk about compromise, I know when you look at our relationship, you talked about that first incident when we talked about when we moved from our first apartment. We were in Parkland Village. We had a 1-bedroom, then a 2-bedroom, and we were going to move because they were, some violence and things like that going on. And you were like, this isn't the right place for us to be. So when we did that, we were going to Northampton. And I guess, would you call that compromising?
Yeah, I think so. When we first, when we moved in Parkland and the violence started happening, I was telling you, I said, we got to get out of here. And the first thing you said, well, we shouldn't leave until we buy, you wouldn't leave until we buy a home. And I started calling, other apartments. I was calling. And they approved us, and we got to move.
Yeah, I never forget when we moved to Northampton, which I thought I was George Jefferson. I really thought.
Yeah, you thought you was doing good. All you wanted was a clean apartment, and you didn't want anything else. I mean, you had your nice car and nice apartment. And
yeah, when we moved to Northampton, I think that was really when not only our relationship, but I think our mindset, well, at least my mindset, your mindset was already there. But I think, my mindset changed when I got in that different environment. So I think when you talk about compromise, I know, that's one of the things I think where we did the first compromise. What's some other things when you think about compromise? What do you think that means?
Well, I think you got to listen to your spouse or, your significant other and make sure that you, sometimes allow them to make decisions too.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, especially with our relationship, is when you talk about compromise and listening. That was really hard for me in the beginning because, again, you want to think you know everything. You want to think you got it all figured out. But sometimes just to listen.
Right, and sometimes when you're young, in young couples, the guy, they seem to think, I got it all together. We're going to stay here. We're going to do this. But sometimes you got to listen, and sometimes when you don't, it can ruin your relationship when you're not listening because the other person could be more frustrated. Yeah,
now I guess as we get older, do you think compromising became easier or do you think it's...
I think it becomes easier as the older you get.
Well, I mean, why do you think that is?
Well, you're more established, and you're getting older and you try to compromise with the person. You don't like to argue much when you get older. A lot of times when you're young, they argue, fight.
Yeah,
you get a certain age, you tired of all that.
Right. You don't want to do all that. You want to kind of...
You just want peace.
Yeah, I think so. And I think early on, because if we look back, especially for younger couples that's watching this, when we look back when we were younger, I guess the compromise wasn't really there.
Right, it wasn't.
I think it was a little bit more of the back and forth. But I think as we got older, like you said, we were able to compromise more. I guess with me, I was able to listen.
Right.
Because I think that's the number one thing. In order to compromise, you have to listen. And I think I was able to listen more.
Just like older. Me, when I was younger, I came from a strict background, so we cooked every day. Every night we cooked. So it was like when I got on my own and got married, it was like, oh, now I want to eat out. Whereas you were saying, oh, let's cook at home. And I wanted to eat out.
Right. So, I mean, even with that, as something as trivial with that, that's compromise, right?
Right.
How can you meet the other person halfway so that it's a win-win?
Right.
And sometimes you have to look at that. How can you compromise to make sure everyone's, I guess,
everybody's happy
with that? Because it is possible. I know, and again, success leaves clues. Someone has your answer. That's why we're talking about that, because it is possible. I mean, I didn't think when we were younger it was possible to have a relationship without going back and forth or all the disagreements. But I think now, and again, we're not perfect and we do disagree, but I'm saying the level or the intensity of the disagreement isn't as significant as it was when we were younger.
Right.
When we had all that, I guess, a little bit more rah-rah with it, you know?
Right.
Does that make sense?
You still got to grow when you're a young couple.
Mm-hmm.
And, you just get mad sometimes, especially if your finances are not there.
Yeah, one of the things, I guess, when you talk about compromise and you talk about, I guess, money, and do you think setting a budget is compromising?
I think so. If you both sit down and try to say, look, we're going to spend on this, we're going to spend on that, we're going to save this. If you sit down and do it together. Yeah. Now, if you're trying to go out there and you spending money and the other person don't know it and stuff like that, then it could be a problem.
Yeah, and I think it's about sitting down together.
Right.
I guess compromising, now that you talk about compromise, I think compromising is sitting down together, whether it's talking about what are you going to eat, whether it's talking about finances, whether it's talking about
taking care of the kids.
Yeah, the children. I
think sometimes you got to compromise even with that to allow both parties to get a break. Maybe sometimes the dad can say, I'll do like 2 days, or, keeping the children while you go out and kind of get your own time. You have to compromise to give each other a break.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because sometimes you don't look at it like that, because when you're talking about compromising and you're talking about, okay, giving someone a break if it's coming to the children, sometimes in your brain you can say, well, like for us, and let's take ourselves for instance. When we first got married, you didn't work outside the home. So sometimes in my brain I would say, okay, well, no, I mean, you should cook, right?
Right.
Or you should watch the children.
Or you'll say, you stay home, you should have a lot of energy. You should be cooking, you should be cleaning, taking care of the children. But a lot of times it's work.
And a lot of times you don't look at it that way. And I'm talking only for myself, and I don't know if this
People
is
don't look at
the
it
male
like that.
perspective or the individual who's not or working on the outside.
Right.
You look as though, okay, the other person should be doing this, or the other person should be doing that. When it's really what you said, you should sit down together,
right,
and compromise.
Right.
You should sit down together, and whether it's doing the budget or doing the meal plan or how to raise the children, you should sit down together and compromise about that.
Because if you don't, the other person can get in a depression, anxiety, and you wouldn't even know it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point, because again, but that still goes back to what you were talking about. Sit down and communicate.
Right.
Right? You should still be sitting down to communicate, because the communication leads to the compromise. But if you don't sit down and talk, how would you even get the compromise?
Right,
going?
and you need to talk, set a meeting with you and your spouse at least once a week and talk about all those things.
Yeah.
So that way stuff won't come up and then they like, well, I didn't know you felt like that.
Yeah, and sometimes, especially early in our marriage, I don't think we did sit-down meetings.
Right.
But now I know we sit down and meet a lot.
Right.
And we go over different things on what we're going to do, whether it's where we're going on a weekend trip, or what type of meal plan. It's like now we sit down and we talk about that.
Right.
You know what I mean? And real quick, ladies and gentlemen, just want to take a quick break for our sponsor. Okay, so we do have a sponsor now, Short Child Care. Tom used to say short in name, but long in service. And that's the same thing for Short Child Care. They're definitely short in name, but long in service. Please, it is a waiting list, but you want to put your child's name on the waiting list now. Because, again, spots go quick when they do open, and they do have an actual seat. All right. So, again, Short Child Care. All right, so with compromising, Tia, let's look at this. When you're talking about, I guess, finances, it's probably one of the, if you look at it, I don't have the statistics, but they say, I guess, finances break up more relationships than anything.
Right.
I guess, mismanagement of finances. So when you look at compromises and talking about financing, how can you compromise when it comes to financing?
Well, first of all, you got to communicate about it. And when you buying big purchases and different things, I think you should sit down and because one spouse might want something more expensive and somebody else might want something that's less expensive. So you just got to, come to an agreement with each other.
Yeah, and you keep coming back to the same thing, Tia. You have to sit down and communicate.
Because it's real big. It's
Right.
real big in a marriage. Communication is the key. You have to communicate because nobody can read your mind.
Yeah, and when you talk about communication and you talk about compromise, it almost go hands in hand. You can't compromise without communication,
Right.
right? And really, you can't communicate without compromise. Sometimes with the communication, when you look at communicating with someone, I've learned on communication, especially compromise, is that I had to listen more.
Right.
Because I know in the beginning I didn't listen much, right? I just thought I knew everything. But now as I'm getting older, I'm learning how just to listen.
Just listen. People just need you to sit down and listen.
Yeah, because and even when I did so-called listen, I would just be listening to respond, right?
Right.
I just can't wait to say what I have to say. But now I'm actually listening to I really want to understand what you're saying.
People are going through, so you have to listen to them.
Yeah, and it's a new day. I didn't buy into much about, hey, this is a different time, but now as I go and as we travel and we see different things, you're starting to see that it is different, right? It is different, and this is the best of times for some, but some is the worst of times because the change is changing so rapidly, right?
Right.
So I guess without compromising with this change being so rapid, you really have to compromise in order to be, I guess, in order to be strive in this new environment that we're in.
Right.
What's your thoughts about that?
I think so. I think you do need to compromise, in this day and time. Somebody might want to start a business or do something else. You should, help them and support them, when you're in a relationship.
Yeah. Because I do read a lot of articles and things, and again, I heard a lot of myths and a lot of stereotypes.
Right.
And a lot of times when they talk about, because you said starting a business or whatever it may be, it seems like if you're not communicating, because you hear, they'll say, well, your family doesn't support you, right?
Right.
Or your loved ones are the first to knock down your idea. But I think when you talk about communication and compromise, sometimes it's really about sitting down, talking to someone.
And educating them, because when we were young, nobody educated us about businesses and real estate and investing your money and stuff like that.
Right, absolutely. And I guess that's even when you talk about your family or your children, it's still going back to that number one thing that you always say, you need to sit down and talk.
Right.
Right? And I think that's the breakdown when you look at, okay, what is the breakdown that we're having?
And really, young people should listen to the people that's older than them, because we already done been through it.
Yeah.
And wish somebody sat down with us earlier.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that helped me was that I was able to seek, I guess, wisdom from individuals who've been down the road I've been through to kind of help me. Not that you have to, take someone's advice and run with it.
Right. But just listen to it.
What Tom used to always tell me, because Tom never pushed his philosophy or ideas on me, he would say, eat the chicken and throw away the bone. And what that means is that take what makes sense or is good for you, and then the rest, just throw it away.
Right.
But at least listen.
That's
because
true.
again, and that's compromising. When you sit down and listen to somebody, that's a part of compromising. Because sometimes you think you know everything. Well, I want to hear somebody else's opinion, right? Because I know it all. But sometimes when you step back and say, let me listen. Because I never forget, and it happens a lot, if someone, for instance, say, hey, can I? Say you're walking the boardwalk, right? And someone say, hey, can you give me $1 or give me whatever it may be? Sometimes you give it to them, and say, hey, how'd you end up like this?
Right.
Because again, there before, the grace of God could be any of us, but
That's true.
sometimes you need to listen and say, how'd you end up like this? Because most of the time they'll tell you, like, because I told you that time and the guy said, hey, I was drinking and I had a wife, I had a family.
Oh, right. That's true.
But I was drinking, and then one drink led to the next. I lost my job. And once the money dried up, I had this problem with drinking. I lost my family.
Right.
So sometimes you have to listen to people and see how it happens. So if you have those small things starting for you, you might say, hey, I need to back up with this, right? Because again, this could lead to something bigger.
Right.
And this could lead to some destruction for me. So if I listen to somebody who's been down that road, it can help you.
Right. That's true.
Yeah. So that's one of the things where you think about compromise. And I guess one of the things we really want to help people with different topics, and we're getting feedback from a lot of people who watch the podcast regularly, and they said, hey, why don't you let us know what your title is for the next podcast so that we can give questions on what we might want to hear.
Right.
So next week, our podcast is going to be about double standards.
Okay.
So if for some reason you have a question about double standards, let us know so we can kind of graft the conversation on what some people may want to hear.
Right.
Because again, success leaves clues. Someone has your answer. So ask the questions. Leave it in comments on this podcast. Leave a comment for double standards on what you want us to talk about when we talk about double standards next week. Leave a comment, okay? Let us know. And if you see a topic that you might want, leave a comment. Let's communicate, okay? Because then we can better craft the show to kind of help more people.
Right.
Or what people might want to know. Because sometimes we get a topic based off some of the issues that we had.
Right.
That we might say something that might help somebody.
That's
so
true.
that you won't go through that. And I'm big on telling people, hey, especially for men, hey, you need to listen, because I think that'll help a lot of men out.
Right.
If we learn how to listen more, right? So double standards, we'll talk about double standards next week. So please leave your questions in the comments, okay? Make sure you like, subscribe, share, okay? Because again, we want to grow our platform, make it more, informative on what you want to hear. Okay? Anything in conclusion, Tia?
Like I said, just communicate with your spouse or your children and compromise.
That's it. All right, so I'll see you. And yes, I do mean you. Living your dreams. Peace.